So yeah, then there was the actual protest. So on the Wednesday, so we had some sort of early morning news articles building up to it. We had an article from a Lib Dem MP in The Guardian on it. We had Daily Post talked about the strike actually happening if the Senate protest didn't go well. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to show you here is just kind of a clip of what happened on the day of the protest. If everything goes to plan. If anyone of you wants the music on that video, it's a free track called Knife Attack. Alan Roberts can point you in the direction of it. It's pretty relevant to the video, but that's a bit spark. As you can see, the protest was actually attracted a lot of people. It was definitely a very sort of once in a lifetime. I don't think any student officer is going to get cheered on into a Senate meeting again in Liverpool, perhaps, unless something like this happens again. But yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. It was a one-off, I'd say. And it was just the tension, I think, and the feeling of inevitability by the closures and the passion that students wanted to actually show what was happening. So in the Senate meeting, as a student officer, we got to attend, and some students, course reps attended with us as well. And we were told that in the meeting, the protest outside was referred to as the noise, which was very respectful. It was very dismissive. I think the university did have a right in some ways to feel a bit angry because they didn't feel that their viewpoint had been put across and exactly what was going on was communicated, but at the same time, I think we would have argued that that was up to them really. I think there was a definite flaw in the communication, not just with staff, but with students there. So the UCU were handing out statements for the meeting. The VC was grilled by staff across the university. But what we got out of the meeting was they made the adjustments. So we managed to get them to agree to an open and full consultation before the next Senate meeting, which would actually finally put sort of a nail in the coffin to the departments. So the student union was going to organise the student part of the consultation, the university would be in charge of the staff consultation. And so what it meant was that we actually had some time to put some real genuine input into the proposals and actually, explain why we believe the disciplines should be kept in the university. And on the department's part, they had to find departmental recovery plans. They'd already had reports done by the university as to their worth as departments, what they were producing, what was working well in the departments, but they had to put forward recovery plans which would improve the research in the department, but also show some kind of strategic vision for the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so what was the role of the student union in all of this? Because I guess this is where what you're most interested in really as unions is exactly what can we do to support students when this campaign happens. Well, it was a really busy time for us actually. We had our guild elections happening, which was always fun. But actually what it meant was that the candidates were actually always talking about the Save Our Subjects campaign. They were also using it in their publicity, and it was a good way of actually getting the message out beyond the departments that are affected. So everyone knew what the Save Our Subjects campaign was. Our role was to ensure that the student experience wasn't affected. So at University Senior Management Team, we submitted proposals to ensure that certain aspects would be looked after if the departments were closed or put forward for. So we were making sure that, for For example, if one of the lecturers left, what would they do to ensure that course continued? This was also in the context of voluntary disengagement being offered by the university as well. So people being offered sort of voluntary redundancy. And so people were nervous that people would just take that option rather than fight for the survival of their department. We were obviously responsible for communicating with a lot of different people, which the SOS campaign, being poorly led by students, couldn't really do. We had the kind of access to senior management team that the students wouldn't have had, and it also meant that we could go in two different kind of communication routes as well. So the students could possibly say a bit more of a controversial thing in the SOS campaign than perhaps the officers could in a certain meeting. But what it meant was there was a constant sort of pressure from two different sides as well. So we kind of used both of our strengths, as we could sort of stand aside sometimes as a union, and then we could, you know, use a student organised SOS campaign as a side as well. And that's where I describe it as the pincer effect. It's quite a geeky way of describing it. We also offered all the services of our policy and communications manager, Alan, who was responsible for the video as well. He basically was constantly liaising with the SOS team. What they did was very professional in terms of they were constantly putting information out there in terms of where the campaign was, what we needed to do next, that kind of thing, constantly liaising with the press. So we needed to help them sort of make sure their message was consistently professional. And also, obviously, being in a university, we were primarily responsible for the logistics of the protest as well. So making sure there was security, there was not going to be any issues, the police were informed that something was going to happen, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. Okay, so just continuing, what happened next? After the protest, there was a bit of coverage. There was a question asked in Parliament about the closures. The chairman of the All-Party Innovation University Science and Skills Committee comment on the knee-jerk reaction of the university on the threatened closure of the departments. Next slide, please. MPs were lobbied throughout the whole campaign by the students. All the MPs were contacted locally. One of the MPs happened to have a son in the philosophy department, which made it a bit interesting in terms of his passion to keep it open. And Chris Grayling actually came to the city, a Conservative MP from the Shadow Cabinet, to speak directly to Howard as well. And the Vice-Chancellor stated quite clearly to him it was not a done deal. Next slide, please. And this is the kind of communication MPs would receive off the Vice-Chancellor as well. He was directly communicating with them to kind of keep the story straight too. Next slide, please. Okay, so how it went as well. We had interesting coverage continuing on throughout the student consultation. We had a emeritus professor suggest the VC is ruling over a banana republic, published in the local paper. The Times posted articles signed by the Political Studies Association, denouncing the threatened closures, and also of all the heads of the philosophy departments across the Russell Group institutions denouncing the decision as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so on April Fool's Day, I think the funniest thing which happened during the campaign, which kind of gave us all light relief, was the university leaving threatened departments off new signs. And it happened to happen on April Fool's Day. Next slide, please. So this was the Roxford building which housed the politics department. And it was still there when, so as you can see, the politics department isn't on the sign. And it just so happens the University Communications accidentally forgot to leave it off. Next slide, please. So it was taken down and the SOS campaign was replaced it instead. And they were ashamed because it was in the local media as well. And so next slide, please. Okay, so throughout the whole, throughout the consultation, basically the idea was for it to never leave the media or to leave students' minds, because there was a need of, just because we've had a big protest doesn't mean that everything's solved. Obviously there's a need for students to engage with the consultation. And this was undergraduates and postgraduates. Next slide, please. So even postgraduates got involved on their poster day. We're putting posters up about SOS, petitioning there, talking to people who are visiting to see their research, and talking about the importance of those three departments as well. Next slide, please. So SOS did succeed in a way. The student submitted consultation document, went to the senior management team, and on Friday the 8th of May, the Guild officially announced the success, that departments were going to remain, the disciplines were going to remain in the university, and the recovery plans from all the departments had been accepted. And this was all announced a week later, actually, which is quite interesting. It started to slow down the media coverage then. Next slide, please. So why did it all happen in the way that it did?